Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. In this segment, an interesting one. We have talked about incarceration in the United States. We've certainly talked to former inmates. We have not, however, ever in 700 plus shows talked to someone that actually was a corrections officer, and certainly not a female corrections officer within the penal system. We will do that. Her name is Joann Martens. In the 1960s, she began working in the Missouri State Penitentiary as its first female corrections officer, and for the next 4 decades, she served in 3 different prisons. And when I say served, being as an employee, overseeing both male and female inmates. It should be an interesting conversation indeed. Joann, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. How are you?
Well, we're good. Thank you for sharing some time today. Again, you got a new book out called One Woman, 3 Prisons, The Rise Within the Ranks. Let me start this. Share with our Lewis at Large listeners, if you would, what path led you to want to work in a penitentiary?
Well, I really, when I got out of high school, I really didn't know what I was going to do. And so I started in clerical, and I am a single mother, and I do have a son that I knew I couldn't support on a clerical salary. So I did get a promotion to a clerk 2, as they call it, at the Missouri State Penitentiary. And we all knew about this. I had cousins and uncles and whatever worked there. But I started as a clerk 2, and it didn't take me 6-8 months to know that this is what I wanted to do. And at that time, they had no female officers in that prison, or very few others other than the female prison. And they were called matrons. So 2 of us started working in the visiting room of the penitentiary, and we were called matrons. Well, I hated that. But a year or 2 down the line, they decided to make us corrections officers. And we were then equal to the men. And so I worked the visiting room part-time, and then I worked all around the institution, which really helped me to know the prison system. And I was just in my element, and then I promoted up through the ranks, and you can ask me any more questions.
Well, I'm curious as to, culturally, in the 1960s and 70s in particular, and I'm generalizing here quite a bit, but I think it's fair to say, was the real proliferation of women into what would be considered many male-dominated fields, such as outside sales, for one, a lot of administrative jobs, a lot of jobs like what you're talking about. There was a great leap, and you can still contend that there's still a long ways to go. But that being the case, did you feel like in any way, shape, or form you're blazing a trail, or was this just Joann Martens looking for the next job?
No, I definitely felt like I was blazing a trail, and I was proud to do it. And I also did want to, help myself financially. But yes, my mother was a factory worker all of her life, so, there was very little for women back in the mid-'60s. So, yes, I wanted to blaze that trail.
Did people show you open hostility, or were they very, very, did you feel that they were pretty welcoming to you? Not really. The men were really not that welcoming in the beginning. It's changed a lot, but no, I went through quite a bit. And I might add, not from the inmates, but from the officers and the other people there. I can name incidents of very embarrassing things. I'm curious as to, again, you worked overtime with male and female inmates. Did those inmate reactions, did those vary just within that group of people?
Yes. Actually, I worked much better with the male inmates than I did the female inmates. And one of the examples is that I just felt like I knew how to talk to the males rather than go in and do something that was very physical. And with the women, they seemed to calm down quicker with a male. Now, not that I didn't get along with them in that, but they were a little harder for me to work with.
What about, I'm curious, let's get off this male-female thing for just a minute here. Let's go back to the basics. I think from what, I think common sense would tell you that those that work in prisons are portrayed many times from the view of the prisoner, whether it's in movies and documentaries, etc. Take us now inside the uniform. Take us inside the mindset of the corrections officer. Walk us through, for example, if you can, Joann, give us a typical day for you, if there's such a thing as a typical day. What would it have been like?
Well, as far as a typical day, when I was an officer, it wasn't as typical as the males because we weren't allowed at that time to do everything that they did. We still had to be escorted to various places and things like that. But I guess as far as the mindset, what I learned was fair, firm, and consistent. That is the way I operated. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that worked there felt that way, because there was history back in the, I can't speak for now, but there is history that a lot of corrections officers experienced alcoholism and divorces and various things like that because there was stress every day when you walked in there. I love the adrenaline rush, and I still, as old as I am, wish I still had that. But it was daily. You had to cover your back. But then I want to put this in. As a woman, I knew how, especially in a male institution, I figured this out early, to find male inmates who would respect me for being fair, firm, and consistent, and they had my back. And I can give a really good instance, but I don't know if you have the time for that.
Absolutely, we do. Go ahead and share it, please. And before you do, real quickly, again, if you just tuned in, you're listening to yours truly, Warner Lewis, on Lewis at Large. We're in a segment talking about what it is to be a female corrections officer, and the first female corrections officer ever in the state of Missouri. That's Joann Martens. She also has a book out called One Woman, Three Prisons, The Rise Within the Ranks. So, Joann, go ahead.
Okay, well, this was when I had moved up some, but it tells you the story. I had to sign an okay for any male inmate that went out on work release, and I had to look through the files and make my judgment as to whether they would be good candidates and not escape. I turned a young man down, and he was furious at me. And I usually took a walk outside every day. Well, as I walked outside, I heard a lot of obscenities coming out of one of the housing units. I knew the voice, and I knew who it was, but because I couldn't prove it, I couldn't do anything about it. But it did irritate me, you know. But later in the afternoon, the lieutenant came up to me and was laughing, and he said, "Guess who checked into to protective custody?" And it was the inmate that I signed, disapproved the work release. And protective custody is when you go into that when you're afraid of someone. And I knew for sure that the group of inmates that I could trust had threatened him. So he went into protective custody. Now, is that right or wrong? It is the laws of the prison. That's how they operate. And did I accept the protection of the people? Yes, I did. So, that's one of the instances that I can say about how to deal with inmates.
How long did you work alone as a woman? Were you the lone woman? How long did it take for another female corrections officer to become a part or at least do jobs similar to yours?
Well, there was one woman that worked with me in the visiting room probably within a year or so. And then, let's see, I started as an officer in 68. The next real movement of women came in 73. And so it took a while. We were sort of the guinea pigs, I guess you would say, me and this other woman. She's now passed away.
Right. What about on a now in the year 2015, 2014-15? If we go to an all women's penitentiary, just in general, would you think what are the percentage of male officers versus female, and then vice versa? Is it 50-50 usually with both genders, or is it mixed all over the place?
I think that, see, there's a lot of institutions in Missouri, and that's all I can speak for. And they're all different in different locations and, whatever. So I would say that say in a female institution, you would probably, hopefully have maybe 60 or 65% women. And that's just a guesstimate. In a male institution, 50-50 would be a little bit hard to fill and do the work, I would say, because there are certain laws that, where women cannot be with male prisoners in certain areas and different things like that. So I would say at least 60% would be of the same sex as a prison.
Overall, is the expectation, Joann, for the female corrections officer truly the same as the male? And let me give you an example. If there is a disturbance where an officer is called in to either break up some kind of a ruckus or a fight or get somebody calmed down, that kind of sort of sometimes probably a mild one-to-one or hand-to-hand combat, are you expected to be able to do the same thing as your male counterpart?
Well, see, we have in each institution what they call an emergency squad that is usually called in for anything bigger than a one-on-one. And that is made up of men and women, and you have to take the exact same strength tests and everything like that. I actually passed that in my 50s. And, it's not an easy test to pass. But on a one-on-one, if you're there, you're expected to handle a situation in whatever manner you can do. Sometimes you can talk them down. And this is where it's important, where a woman can actually talk a man down quicker than a man can. So, but you're expected to do, yes, if you're now that wasn't so when I was there. It's changed a lot. But now in modern times, you are expected as a woman in a male prison to hold, carry your weight.
I'm curious as you were putting your work together, again, it's called One Woman, Three Prisons, The Rise Within the Ranks. You're drawing a lot from your own experience. I'm curious as to the Missouri penal system and the justice system over there. Were they helpful with you, and are they looking on this current work with smiles, or are they frowning on you at this point?
You mean about my book?
About the book itself, the content, correct.
I think the majority of it, they would, and I have told the director of the institution that I was writing this book, and he knew it. And there are a few instances I refer to with certain personnel that they may not be happy with. I've never had anybody tell me that. But, and one of the assistant superintendents came to my book signing in Missouri, and she was very happy with, being there and whatever. But I'm sure there's a few things in there that they don't like to hear, especially some of the things that happened way back, like in the 60s and early 70s.
Do you, I'm curious as to if the general public were allowed to get a real look-see, so to speak, for a week's period of time inside America's prisons and the experiences that you had, would we come away feeling really, really depressed, or would we feel hopeful, or what would we feel? What do we need to feel about them?
Well, the main purpose of a prison is to protect society. That's what the main purpose is. rehabilitation is important, and it's much more important now than it was back when I started. And I firmly agree with it that most can be rehabilitated. But if you worked in there, if you were just there for a week, it would probably be very hard for you to comprehend things because, there's so many different instances. And, working with, say, I've never done this, but say working with the people on death row, they have nothing left to lose. So they're a whole different ballgame than someone that is working to get out. And not that I'm saying they're all bad. I mean, they're not all, they don't all act out, but some do, And drugs are a bad thing in a prison, and they still come in. And so, you have a lot of negatives, and that's why I made reference in my book that you have to laugh at some of the silly things that happen, or else you couldn't make it in there.
Is it fair to say that the officers that work there do, in fact, establish relationships with the prisoners? I mean, you actually get to know them pretty well, do you not, over time, I would think?
You do, yes. And you do get to know them, and as long as you keep that fair, firm, and consistent and have the respect, then you can have somewhat of a relationship with them. But you can't cross any line, particularly male versus female or vice versa. You can't cross that line because that's immediate dismissal and even a crime now.
Joann, I'm really curious about this. As a former, long-time worker in the penal system, in the correction system, do you believe in the death penalty now, and did your view on that change at all as a result of your years within the system?
Well, I don't know if it changed because of my years in the system, but I will say that in the beginning, I believed in the death penalty. And one of my bosses experienced being there. I never did experience that, but he was there when someone was put to death, and he said it was horrendous, and it was hard. And then a minister that worked at the prison, we were talking one day, and I was telling him I believed in the death penalty. He said, well, do you believe in abortion? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, you have to be pro-life all the way. You can't be one or the other. And that made sense to me. So now, no, I don't believe in the death penalty.
Do you see, what do we do? Is life in prison the appropriate punishment for a convicted murderer?
Oh, there's so many ifs to that.
Right.
It depends on the mental health of the murderer. It depends on, they're not going to get any better sitting there in prison. Many of the lifers I knew had a one-time crime of passion. Now, I'm not talking about serial killers or, serial rapists or anything like this, but I'm talking about some of them were a crime of passion. And could they be rehabilitated and released? Yes, I think they could, depending on their mental health and whatever. And I do think, mental health is an issue in and out of prison. We don't have enough to help these people. So it almost has to be done on an individual case. I knew some women that at one time Missouri had a stipulation called 50 years without parole, which means you would do 50 years. And the governor at one time, I don't remember which one, but he demolished that rule, and several of the women, 50-year stips we called them, went out and have gone on to become productive citizens. Some male lifers have served 15, 20 years, and they have gone out to be productive citizens. So it's more on an individual basis. You can't throw them all into one category.
Joann, and again, if you just joined us, Warner Lewis here from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, a really interesting conversation here with Joann Martens. She's the author of a new work called One Woman, Three Prisons, The Rise Within the Ranks. She spent 40 years serving in corrections, or the early years in particular, being the only female. Joann, I'm curious as to a life spent with this. You've seen a lot. Are prisons, in your opinion, doing what they're supposed to do? And one of the things you said was keep those criminals away from the public. Is there any real rehabilitation that's going on, or are we fooling ourselves? What do you think?
No, there is some real rehabilitation. There is not enough, but since I've moved through the ranks, I've seen, more education stressed. The young people have to get their GEDs. I don't know. See, I can't speak for every prison because it all depends on the money the state allows. But I've seen a lot of good drug rehabilitation programs. I've seen work release. I've seen religious, I'm not meaning Bible study, but religious people that come in and work with them. There's all kinds of new programs, giving back, programs with dogs now that help the prisoner and they train them. There's all kinds of things. And reentry is now big everywhere. And I fully support reentry. I worked in it after I left the prison system. You have to have, most of these people have to have a helping hand for at least 6 months after they're out. If you've got a full supportive family with quite a bit of money, yes, you might go out and do okay. But if you don't, it is unbelievable to try to get out and reestablish your life, especially after any period of time. And drugs, including marijuana, as far as I'm concerned, are detrimental to anyone's success.
Question for you: if we gave a personality test to everybody that decided or has made a decision they wanted to work within the penal system, would they all be the same? I'm curious as to the personality that says, I want to go do that. And I'm curious as to, not that you're crazy to want to do it. I mean, it's a necessary job, obviously. But I'm curious as to the mindset and what you found. What would people have in common that work there?
Well, for one thing, there's one type of person that it's just a job. That's with any place. But for the people that really, truly get in and try to do the work, you have to be strong. You very definitely have to have a strong personality. You have to be culturally diverse and ready to meet any type of person and work with them. And you have to let it go when you walk out the door, because I've experienced a lot of that. You have to let it go when you go home. And you just have to generally like working with people. And my son says, Mom, why do you like working with the people in prison and probation and that? I said, I feel that I can talk to them almost better than I can talk to you. I know that sounds crazy, but I've loved this life's work. And if I could continue on, I would.
Well, it is a fascinating subject, and we appreciate you so much sharing some time today. Again, the work is called One Woman, Three Prisons, The Rise Within the Ranks. Joann Martens is her name, talking about her nearly 4 decades of serving in the public interest in the prisons in Missouri. Joann, how can people find out more information about your story and about the book?
Well, the best place for now is to go on Amazon.com, and you can either put in my name or the name of the book, and it will come in, and it gives the history of the author, and it also gives just some general description of the book, and I think there's some pages you can look at. And then another thing, I am on YouTube with an interview. Now, this was my granddaughter doing it, so it's not a professional interview, but it might give you more insight. And then I also have a Facebook page, and they're all called One Woman, Three Prisons.
All right.
So that's how you could find it.
You got it. Hey, listen, again, thank you so much, and spending time with us, and have a great 2015.
Well, you too, and I really appreciate the interview.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.